Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Delta Stewardship Council meeting. Today is Thursday, July 28th, 2022. I'd like to welcome you, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we are now going to roll call and establish our quorum. We'll start with Councilmember Judge Damrell. Councilmember Moranian.
Moranian here.
Councilmember Natoli.
Natoli here.
Councilmember Smith. And for the record, Councilmember Lee and Councilmember Zingali will be absent from today's proceeding, and Madueño is here. We will now go into closed session, litigation, Water Code Section 85210.5, and we expect to return at 10 a.m. We will now go into recess. I don't mind the stench. I decided I wanted. Welcome back to the Delta Stewardship Council meeting. Today again is July 28th, 2022, and we will now reestablish quorum after our closed session. And again, it is now 10 a.m. and there is nothing to report out of closed session. We will again establish roll call. Councilmember Damrell. Councilmember Moranian.
Present.
Councilmember Natoli.
Here.
Councilmember Smith. And again, noting Councilmember Zingali and Councilmember Lee are absent, and Madueño is here. Just wanted to make a notation that we will be making a small change to the agenda due to some time constraints from some of our presenters. We are swapping agenda item 10, the lead scientist report, and agenda 11, the science fellows introduction. The science fellows will now go first, followed by Dr. Larson's report. Moving on to our consent calendar. Actually, no, we need to do public comment first. If any member of the public is interested in providing public comment on any item on the agenda during today's meeting, please turn in or send an email blue card to the clerk at engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov as seen on your screen. Be sure to note your name and the agenda item that you wish to speak on. When called on, either approach the podium or the clerk will unmute you. Now we will move on to the consent calendar. And the consent calendar consists of the adoption of the June 23rd, 2022 meeting summary and the contract amendment with the Regents of the University of California, San Diego, the California Sea Grant for the 2020 class of the Delta Science Fellows, and 2020-2021 classes of State Policy Fellows. Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
It's been a motion by Councilmember Moranian, a second by Councilmember Smith. And we will take roll call. Councilmember Damrell. Councilmember Natoli.
Natoli, aye.
Councilmember Moranian.
Moranian, aye.
Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Madueño, aye. And I apologize, we did not take any public comment. Beck, was there any public comment?
There was no public comment.
Thank you. Let's see, moving on to the chair's report. And actually I have a couple of things I just want to comment on. And first and foremost, I don't want to steal the thunder, but want to say congratulations to our new legal general counsel, Jorge Aguilar, and I'll let Jessica introduce him further later. I also wanted to acknowledge a couple of key meetings that I've had the opportunity and pleasure to attend. There was obviously the DPIC meeting, which was last Monday, and I'll let staff comment more on that. But I also want to share, as I sit and I listen to some of these meetings, it's incredibly, incredibly exhilarating, if you will, to see how much work is being done on behalf of the Delta by so many agencies, but to also recognize the work that this agency does and how it plays a critical role in helping to bring together all of these agencies. And so after the DPIC meeting, the Tuesday after, there was a brief trip with a couple of us, and it included Gary Gold, I have his name correct now, from the Department of the Interior, and a couple of members from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. And again, being out on the Delta and having that time to really explore and chat and just experience the Delta for what it is, and to be able to say, you know, what is it that we are going to do to maintain its sustainability for the future. So again, a couple of great meetings. I also had an opportunity to sit down and have a full conversation with Secretary Wade Crowfoot and Secretary Karen Ross. Incredibly important meetings for the work that we do, and just to establish that line of communication with the two of them. And again, acknowledging that we do need to work as partners and synchronize again as much as possible, so that they do see, or that we all recognize that we are allies in our work to advance the sustainability of the Delta. And with that, I will turn it over to Chris. Is it going? Am I turning it over to Chris? Is it Clyer or Clear? Clyer, Chris Clyer. And Chris, I don't see you.
Yes, I am.
Oh, there you are, Chris. God, it's like magic. I love it. Chris, if you would share a little bit more about the DPIC meeting, and again, want to commend you for your great and excellent role in helping us to facilitate that.
Well, thank you for that, Chairman Dueño. So I'm Chris Clyer, I'm the Executive Fellow at the Council, and I'm here today to provide a recap of the DPIC meeting held on July 18th. So as meeting chair, Dr. Larson did a tremendous job, first moderating a panel on monitoring in the Delta. Discussion on this item included a call for the harmonization of monitoring efforts across the Bay Delta, as well as the consideration of developing a monitoring framework or work group for use across monitoring programs and systems. Next, DPIC endorsed the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda. Strong support for the SAA was voiced by multiple DPIC members. Next, the third annual Delta Crosscut Budget Report, representing fiscal year 2020 to 2021, was presented, with DPIC members noting the continued importance of the information contained in the report. As Chairman Dueño mentioned, the day following the DPIC meeting, we coordinated a boat tour of the Delta at the request of the Department of Interior's Assistant Deputy Director for Water and Science, Gary Gold. Finally, Chairman Dueño and Special Assistant for Planning and Science, Amanda Bull, are beginning to brainstorm and plan the next DPIC meeting, which is currently scheduled for November 7th. It'll be hybrid format, both there in the CNRA building and on Zoom. And Amanda will provide updates as the meeting gets closer. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
It's got a red light. Oh, there we go. Again, thank you so much, Chris, for that excellent recap. And again, I want to acknowledge and thank Dr. Larson for chairing that DPIC meeting. The planning had already pretty much gone full force by the time I got elected chair. So she took the chairship for me at that DPIC meeting, but I intend to fulfill my duties as the newly elected chair, and will be very proud to chair the next DPIC meeting. And as Chris mentioned, yes, we are exploring some options and maybe new ways with Amanda and with our executive director, Jessica, on how we can make these meetings even more engaging to get more participation. I'm going to actually ask my peers here on this dais if there are any council member updates that you'd like to report out on. No,
Madam Chair, just very quickly.
absolutely.
Just would note that yesterday at the Delta Conservancy, a new chair was elected. So Mitch Mashburn, Supervisor of Solano County, is the new chair for the Delta Conservancy. And I think you may have also noted, I think it was a press release, but there were a number of grant awards for restoration and projects that support the Delta environment, but certainly Delta communities that were awarded yesterday, several $1 billion, in fact. So a lot of good work. And again, much of that is Prop 1 dollars that have been appropriated. So
Excellent.
yep, that's all I have.
Thank you so much for that, Councilmember
I
Natoli.
have one.
Yes.
I know that we requested or discussed in having some of the agencies in Southern California to be present and make presentations in the meeting in October, I believe. Am I right, Jessica?
Correct.
Uh,
We sent out a save the date and received at least one affirmation from the general manager of Metropolitan to come talk about reduced reliance on the Delta at our October meeting. So
Yeah,
we're
that's
pulling
a-
together a panel there.
Two more that Jessica's working on is Barbara Romero at LA Sanitation and Mark Pastrella at Public Works. And they all have their strategies on water use in the South, lack of reliability or limited reliability on the Delta, finding local sources. So therefore, it's good for us to hear there. And I'm excited for having it. Thank you.
Excellent. Great. Great. Yes, I'm going to actually look and explore and had the opportunity to have a couple of conversations with our executive director about how do we get, our council even more engaged. And so I really welcome the opportunity to visit more in Southern California and work with Councilmember Smith and Councilmember Moranian and using your incredible networks and contacts in Southern California to, again, help to elevate our presence, our role, our work, and the critical importance it plays for Southern California residents as well. So we'll be exploring a little bit more and brainstorming.
We
So
welcome that.
excellent. Thank you. We will now move on to, or actually, Beck, is there any public comment on this item?
No public comment.
Okay, we will now move on to the actual public comment period. This item is for the public to comment on any topic not on the council's agenda. Any comments on the items on the agenda will be taken during that time. Any public comment?
No public comment.
Okay, I just want to be extra careful. We will now move on to the executive officer's report. And for that, we have our executive director, Ms. Jessica Pearson.
Thank you and good morning. We have a save the date to announce for the upcoming Science for Communities workshop on October 6th from 3 o'clock to 7 o'clock p.m. This is going to be held at the Big Break Center in Oakley. The council is hosting a workshop with a goal of boosting the Delta community's awareness and access to environmental data and technical tools available to them, and to foster interaction between scientists and community members looking to get more engaged. Registration will begin for this event in late summer. It will be free, and we are looking forward to the event. I wanted to make note that the draft environmental impact report is now available for review for the Delta Conveyance project, a much anticipated document. As many people know, the Department of Water Resources yesterday released this draft. I believe it's available on their website. Like many others, our staff will be reviewing the document over the next 90 days and preparing a comment letter that addresses consistency with the Delta plan. We will also be informed by the Delta Independent Science Board's review of the document, which will be focused on the scientific underpinnings of that report. I have one covered action update. On July 6th, Reclamation District 2028 submitted a certification of consistency for the Bacon Island Levee Rehabilitation Project. The project seeks to rehabilitate the north and south sides of Bacon Island's levee system at Connection Slough and Santa Fe Cut. This is approximately 3.5 miles in length, and it is done to achieve minimum levy standards. The project's public review and appeal period is open now and closes on August 5th. On behalf of the council, staff sent a letter to the city of Lathrop regarding their draft EIR for the city's general plan. It's a general plan update. The council's letter to the city states that the general plan update may be a covered action. The letter also states that the council staff has not identified any specific inconsistencies with the Delta plan, but that we invite them to engage with us to discuss the potential applicability and to ensure consistency as they move forward into implementation. We have a few exciting personnel announcements. Earlier this month, Governor Gavin Newsom announced the appointment of Jorge Aguilar as our new chief counsel and Brandon Chapin as legislative and policy advisor. Jorge comes to us from the California Attorney General's office, where he served as Deputy Attorney General since 2015. He was a senior associate at the Saki Law Group from 2013 to 2015, general counsel at Powerlane Corporation in 2013, and an associate at Sundin, Salinas, and Pyle from 2008 to 2013. He was a staff attorney at the Eviction Defense Center from 2004 to 2007, and he earned his JD from Washington and Lee University. Congratulations, Jorge.
Thank
you. Brandon Chapin, who you all know well, has been appointed by Governor Newsom to the position of Legislative and Policy Advisor, which has been vacant since Ryan Stambrough was promoted to Chief Deputy in March of last year. Brandon has been the Public Participation Manager here at the Council since 2018, and before joining the Council was an Associate Governmental Program Analyst at the Delta Conservancy, also worked as a Legislative Analyst at the Department of Toxic Substances Control. He earned his MPPA from Cal State Sacramento, and as we search for his replacement, he will be wearing 2 hats and will continue to help us out on public participation and meeting services. So thank you, Brandon. A small team, we wear lots of hats. So please welcome me and please join me in welcoming and congratulating both Jorge and Brandon. We're so pleased to have them aboard. The outreach highlights report, the quarterly contract report, and our updated active projects lists are available in your packets, also available online on our website. I don't believe we have a legal update, but Jorge, if you'd like to speak, then now's your chance.
I would like to, just like to simply say that there is no legal update. Thank you.
There you go. Off to a good start. And the legislative bill report is also available in your packets. If you ever have any questions about any of the bills in that report, please let us know. I think with that, unless there are any questions, that concludes my executive officer's report.
Are there any questions? Any comments? Well, I will actually, again, I think I've already told Jorge like 15 times, welcome and congratulations, but I guess there's always room for another one. So again, Jorge and Brandon, congratulations to the two of you. Brandon, you are a familiar face, but we just want to, again, congratulate you and thank you again for your service. And that 2-hat thing, just get used to it. Thank you. And Jorge, again, congratulations. And we so welcome you. Absolutely welcome you. Thank you. Beck, is there any public comment on this item?
No public comment, Madam Chair.
Okay, we will move on. As indicated earlier, we're going to flop the 2 items. So we will now take item number 11 as item number 10, the 2022 Science Fellows Cohort Introduction. And for that, we have Dr. Laurel Larson, our Delta lead scientist, who will, I think she's here.
I am here virtually. Thank
Hello.
you. Thank you, Virginia, and apologize for my voice. I'm a little sick here with my son. But I am delighted to kick off this agenda item, and I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Jill Harris, with the Delta Science program. But first of all, I just wanted to make a few remarks. The Delta Science Fellowship is one of 2 fellowship programs that we execute in collaboration with the California Sea Grant This program is distinguished from the State Policy Fellows Program, which is the program in which we recruit fellows to spend a one-year residency in the council and is a statewide program. The Delta Science Fellowship Program is specific to the Delta and to our collaboration with Delta Sea Grant. It's one of our flagship mechanisms for implementing the science action agenda. And I like to think of it as a gift that keeps giving, because not only does it help us to address these priority science actions that are in alignment with management needs, but I think most importantly, it represents an investment in the next generation of science leaders. So later in the lead scientist report, you'll hear about some of the work being done by one of these current science leaders. And I'm excited to introduce, or to have Jill introduce you to this next class that have just been selected. I'll also say that this is a program that's been around since 2003. This is the 13th class of fellows. And to date, it has supported 107 fellows, both at the master's, PhD, and postdoctoral scholar level. The last thing I'll say is that this is a really competitive program. This round, we were only able to fund 8 of the 21 proposals that we received, and all proposals received at least a competitive ranking from the panel, which just illustrates how strong this up and coming class of students is. So congratulations to all of the fellows who are here with us today. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jill Harris, who's one of the newer members of the Delta Science program. She's a senior environmental scientist, and she will introduce you to this class of fellows.
Thanks, Dr. Larson, for that introduction. My name is Jill Harris. I'm a new senior environmental scientist in the Collaborative Science and Peer Review Unit. And I'm really pleased that my first time speaking to you, Chairman Dueño and members of the council, is on the first time I'm getting to talk to you directly is about this really neat fellowship program. We're just really impressed with this group of fellows, and we're really excited for you to meet many of them today. I'll give you a quick overview of the program, a little bit of history, and then we have some of our fellows here on the line with us, and they'll be able to introduce themselves and their projects, and you can ask them any questions that come up. Can we go to the next slide? Thanks. So a quick history of the Delta Science Fellowship Program. As we all know, funding science is a core part of our mission here at the Delta Stewardship Council, and our goal to provide the best possible unbiased scientific information to inform decision-making in the Delta. And one of the ways that we carry out this mission is through funding science. And one of the ways we fund science is through this fellowship program. And this is, the program runs through this long-standing partnership with California Sea Grant. As Dr. Larson mentioned, we funded over 100 fellows since the program began in 2003. And there are 2 ways that I think this fellowship program is a little bit different from other fellowships that are out there for scientists. One is that all of the research that happens under this program is geared toward our science action agenda, toward these high priority needs for management that we've identified in the science action agenda. And the second reason is that our fellows have both academic mentors from their home institutions, as well as community mentors from agencies, from state and federal agencies who guide them in using scientific information to advance decision-making. And I'll reiterate what Dr. Larson said, which is that we've found that our fellows have really strong ties to the Delta science community. Many of them go on to work in the Delta area as scientists, as managers, as decision makers. Some of our past fellows are mentoring current fellows, which is a really neat cycle to see continuing. So we feel like this program both provides really high quality science for decision making in the Delta, and it also builds the capacity of scientists in the Delta. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So this year, our 2022 Delta Science Fellows, there are 8 of them, which is possible through generous support from the state water contractors who funded one of the fellowships this year. They were selected through a very competitive review process. We convened expert review panels from practicing scientists from around the country. And new this year, we had 2 separate panels, one for biophysical research and one for social science research. And this is part of the Delta Science Program's general push towards increasing social science capacity and research in the Delta. Our fellows come from 5 different universities in the University of California and Cal State University system. We have master's students, PhD students, and postdoctoral scholars. And their community mentors come from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Department of Water Resources, the Department of Pesticide Regulation, and USGS. And before we move on to introduce them, I just really want to emphasize again, like the comments we got from the review panel over and over again were just about how impressive this cohort is, how strong their proposals were, how the quality of their science. And I hope you'll see some of that when you meet them. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. I'm going to introduce the first three fellows who were not able to join us today. Maybe they'll be able to join us for a future meeting. First up, we have Andrea Kust, who's a postdoc at UC Berkeley. Her research is titled Identification of Environmental Conditions Driving Cyanobacterial Multi-Species Blooms and Their Toxicity Using Genome-Resolved Metagenomics. I am not a genome scientist, but this is sort of this slide shows a schematic of how her research works to sample from the bloom to be able to identify the cyanotoxins and the genera of the cyanobacteria. She will use new genomic techniques to identify and link cyanobacterial taxa and cyanotoxins within harmful algal blooms, or HABs. And her results will leverage existing monitoring data from the Interagency Ecological Program to help identify drivers and impacts of HABs and cyanotoxins. Next slide. Nicole, were you able to join? Did we see Nicole in the presentation? Okay, wasn't sure if you would be able to make it today. So Nicole Parker is a PhD student, a PhD candidate at UC Berkeley. Her project is titled Harmonizing Pesticide Risk Management of the Bay Delta Watershed. And this map shows some of her preliminary results showing watersheds within the region that have increased risk from pesticides. She's actually getting an extension of her previous Delta Science Fellowship. She has a one-year extension to expand upon the pesticide management prioritization model that she developed under her 2020 Delta Science Fellowship. She's going to add multi-species indices, pesticide transport under diverse irrigation practices, and look at pesticide degradation under a range of Bay Delta soil types. Her results will enable farmers and other residents of agricultural areas to better understand their exposure to pesticides and to identify opportunities to improve their pesticide use practices. Next slide, please. Tara Posey is a PhD student at UC Davis, also not able to join us today. Her project is titled Mapping the Adaptation Governance Network of the Delta. And this schematic on the screens shows the types of products she creates that show sort of the network analysis, the network linkages within the Delta governance community. She will conduct a survey and in-depth case studies to assess learning and cooperation within the governance system for climate change adaptation in the Delta. Her results will inform governance strategies for adapting to climate change, particularly for climate vulnerable communities. Okay, next slide. This is enough for me. You're going to now hear from fellows themselves. So next up, we have Elsie Carrillo. Elsie, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Elsie's a PhD candidate at UC Santa Cruz, and her project is titled Functional Diversity and Predator-Prey Dynamics along the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta. Elsie, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elsie Carrillo, and I'm a fourth-year Ecology and Evolutionary Biology PhD candidate in the Meta Lab at UC Santa Cruz. My research interests are on the foraging ecology of semi-aquatic snakes like garter snakes that live at the water's edge. My previous work included investigating aquatic prey capture via laboratory experiments, so I'm both ecstatic and grateful to have this opportunity to get out of the lab and into the field to study the predator-prey relationships of snakes and invasive species along the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta, thanks to the support of the Delta Science Program.
Thanks, Elsie. Let's go to the next slide. And Garfield, you're up next. Garfield Kwan is a postdoctoral scientist. Can we go to the next slide? At the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. He does not study snakes. Are we stuck on the slide? I'm not in control. There we go.
There we go.
That looks better. Garfield is a postdoc at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. His project is titled Fish Out of Breath, Assessing, Developing, and Validating Physiological Bioindicators of Hypoxia Across the Delta. Garfield, go ahead.
Thank you, Jill. So as Jill said, hi, everyone. I'm a postdoc at Scripps Oceanography and NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center in San Diego. And these two images are just showing some of the biochemical techniques that I use to study larval and adult fishes and the response to their physiological response to climate change. Thanks to the Delta Science Fellowship, I now have an opportunity to expand my research expertise into conservation physiology. And as the aquatic system warms, their ability to hold oxygen decreases. And when that falls below a biologically sustainable limit, we call that hypoxia. And hypoxia is especially problematic for sensitive and endangered species like the salmon and the delta smelt because it limits fitness and mobility. So my proposed project focuses on quantifying hypoxia tolerance in those two fishes across a range of temperatures, then integrate this information with existing environmental monitoring data across the delta to create a model called a metabolic index. And this metabolic index model will help optimize existing and future management decisions, such as where to release fishes, where to invest efforts for future wetland restoration projects, or where to anticipate future areas of concern. So at Davis, I will be working with Doctors Nan Fungi and Levi Lewis at UC Davis, as well as mentored by Jim Hobbs from California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Thank you.
Thanks, Garfield. And that's one of those examples where two or maybe all three of Garfield's mentors were past Delta Science Fellows themselves, which is a really neat tie-in to have. Okay, next up we have Maya. Can we move to the next slide? Thanks. Maya Matsumura is a master's student from Cal State East Bay. Her project is titled Using High-Frequency Flux Measurements to Constrain Dissolved Inorganic Carbon in a Tidal Wetland Carbon Budget. Maya, take it away.
Thanks for that intro, Jill. Hi, everyone. My name is Maya Matsumura. I'm a second-year graduate student at CSU East Bay. My research focuses on carbon cycling in tidal wetland ecosystems, specifically the import and export, also known as flux, of dissolved inorganic carbon, or DIC. So I'll be using high-frequency atmospheric and hydrologic carbon flux data collected on-site by the Eddy Covariance Tower, which you can see in our image here, and a suite of aquatic sensors. So through data analysis and development of empirical models, I hope to better constrain the carbon budget of wetland ecosystems and gain insight into the biogeochemical drivers of carbon flux. This in turn will aid wetland restoration and management. I thank everyone here for this amazing opportunity, and I look forward to working on this project with my mentors, Patty Oikawa and Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Maya. Let's move on to the next slide, which is Megan. Megan Pagliaro is a PhD candidate at UC Berkeley, and her project is titled Restoring Tidal Marsh Food Webs, Assessing Restoration Effects on Trophic Interactions and Energy Flows in the San Francisco Bay Delta. Megan, or do we have Megan here? Okay, Megan just popped in. So Megan, if you can hear us, you can unmute yourself and turn on your video and go ahead.
Hello, everybody. My name is Megan Pagliaro, and I am a fourth-year PhD student, PhD candidate in Dr. Albert Ruhi's lab at UC Berkeley, where I study tidal marsh restoration ecology in the San Francisco Estuary. For my dissertation research, I'm interested in whether the restoration of tidal marshes translates into the recovery of food webs and the interactions between plants, herbivores, and predators. I'm comparing food webs at 6 sites, 3 reference and 3 restored, spanning the low salinity zone. To study these food webs, I'm using stable isotopes, which are biological markers that allow us to determine who eats whom. My goal is to help design tidal marsh restoration projects and make them as successful as they can be. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in the Delta Science Fellowship Program. I'm so excited to further my research and grow as a tidal marsh scientist. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. And last up, we have, last but not least, of course, is Parsa Safarinia, who's a postdoc at UC Berkeley. And his project is titled Examining the Relationship Between Longfin Smelt, Zooplankton, and Flow in the San Francisco Bay Delta. Okay, Parsa.
Good morning. I'm Parsa. I'm currently a postdoc at UC Davis with Andrew Ripple, and we'll be transitioning to the labs of Stephanie Carlson and Albert Ruhi for my fellowship, with Jim Hobbs as my community mentor. My main research interests are about the role of water flow and disturbance in structuring biological communities, generally in aquatic systems. And for my fellowship, I'll be constructing some new models to understand the relationship between flow and other environmental conditions with long-fin smelt populations at large spatio and temporal timescales. And so, yeah, looking forward to it and happy to be here.
Thanks so much, Parsa. And I also saw that Nicole just joined us. So if you'll allow us just one moment to go back, Nicole, I tried to give an overview of your project and did not do as good of a job as you will do. So
yeah, so sorry, my phone service is terrible at my house, and then my internet went out, so I had to do some bike riding. Anyway, so here we are.
I'm glad you made it.
Go over it. Okay. Yeah. So hi all. So I am actually was awarded additional funding to build off of my 2020 fellowship, which had been to really come up with a model that could handle the super high resolution pesticide use reports that exist for California. And as a part of that effort, I was really able to observe which watersheds or sub-watersheds of the Bay Delta watershed are experiencing increases in risks for aquatic organisms, and dug into this kind of hairy question of cumulative risk, and built a tool that could really help to facilitate our understanding of cumulative risks, given that many risk assessments only consider one chemical at a time, especially at the regulatory, from the regulatory perspective. Those specific labs and agencies will look at cumulative risk. It's not currently an approach that's taken when approving pesticides. So I really wanted to figure out a way to leverage our amazing pesticide use data set in California, and to come up with a model that is both a free web and desktop tool to help understand and mitigate risks of pesticides in the Bay Delta watershed. Moving forward on this effort, I had originally hoped to adopt tools and adapt them for the Bay Delta watershed, but to achieve my aims, I had to kind of build from the ground up. So this continuational funding will actually support me continuing to build this new tool, which will actually also be able to pull in the irrigation data from all the unique growers, and I'll use hydrological approaches and as higher resolution evapotranspiration data from crops to really refine evaluating how these different irrigation management practices are affecting risk in the Delta. Another component is often there's not a kind of cohesive approach for evaluating the risk for diverse taxa. Either those taxa are evaluated individually for individual chemicals, or there's a small group of species, or there's like no harmonized indicator, which really is like a number that can be looked at and just be like, okay, across the board, you know, what's this health risk for the diverse taxa that we care about? And so I'm working to develop a tool that enables users to assign weights to the different taxa, kind of how much they care about it, and to really harmonize these indices for the many taxa that reside there, with the best available data to look at that. And then finally, as I move forward in this next year of funding, I will be working to better understand how variable degradation rates are affecting pesticide risk. So typically agencies, when screening risk, employ a single degradation rate for pesticides in soils. But if you really look at studies where degradation is explored for even the same for soils under the exact same environmental conditions, you'll see like often like a 500 to 1,000% difference in those degradation rates under the same conditions for unique soils. So I'm really going to dive into this question of how the unique soils in the Bay Delta affect pesticide risk, and really leverage available data sets for the actual ranges that exist for pesticide degradation to better understand the sensitivity of pesticide runoff to these degradation rates.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, thanks. That's excellent. I'm glad we got to hear it directly from you. So we're gonna wrap things up now, just with a final thank you again to the scientists who served on our review panels and selecting this class of fellows. Thanks to California Sea Grant and the state water contractors for their support in operating this program. And a final congratulations to all of our fellowships. Thank you for all of our fellows. Congratulations on your fellowships. Thanks for joining us today. We're really looking forward to seeing the results of your research. And now we can probably stop sharing the screen and open the floor to the council to see if there's any questions about the program as a whole or any specific questions for our researchers.
Thank you so much, Jill and Dr. Larson. I'm going to open it up to the council for any questions or comments, and we'll start with Councilmember Moranian.
Yes, I have a question. I just want to trying to understand generally the process of selection in terms of statewide participation from different regions. And I know subject matter is always important, but also regionally, how do we make sure that we approach the entire state?
Are you asking about representation of where the fellows are from or where their research occurs?
Where they're from, the schools where they're coming from.
Yeah, so I may ask Laurel, Dr. Larson,
Yeah,
to pop
I
in.
think that was my
Yep.
questions was for her.
Yep.
Thank you.
She's the selector.
Yes, so I could talk a little bit more about our process of selection. So we convened these two panels, the social panel and the biophysical panel, of independent experts, and they're really from all over the place, all over the country. And those panelists provided us with a ranking of the proposals into highly competitive, and not competitive categories. And there was some discussion of relative rankings amongst those proposals. And then based on that information, our team internally sat down and looked at those rankings together with a few other criteria. And those criteria were to promote diversity in terms of the science action agenda areas that were covered, diversity in terms of the demographics of the class of fellows, and then also institutional diversity. And so and budget also came into play in that final decision. So those are the criteria on which the final decision.
Sure. So you're assured that we reach enough universities to make sure that we have applicants from everywhere, and the way that we define where do we look, what is the universe from which we pick, is you're assured that there's enough work done to make sure that we reach out to more than the schools that traditionally get selected, which is Davis, Berkeley,
Yeah.
Consistently. I'm just trying to understand that.
Yeah, so the Sea Grant program has a broad network that they use to help us advertise these fellowship opportunities widely. And then our staff did a really great job of reaching out to many other networks and professional societies as well. So basically we advertise through using networks of previous fellows, contacts at a range of state universities, and then various professional societies, as well as Sea Grants network for advertising the fellowships.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Natoli.
I think Christy.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you, Madam Chair. Just a very brief congratulations to all of our fellowship awardees, and your work is really exciting, really promising. I have to say, as a lay person who is not a scientist, it is so reassuring to me to see the next generation of scientific leaders in this state be so ambitious in your thought process and in what you contribute. And each of these individual studies, of course, aggregates to a whole of scientific data and information that's going to guide us forward for better environmental choices in the future. So congratulations. I look forward to seeing the results of your work, and thank you for being a part of this process.
Thank you. Now, Councilmember Natoli.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I would certainly echo my colleagues. Congratulations to all the fellows, and certainly to our lead folks, our doctors on this as well. I wanted to just maybe ask Nicole if she's still on the pesticide risk. I know she went into some detail, and there's a map attached on the slide. Nicole, is that map larger than what we see on the screen? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it got cut off some. So the selection process for evaluating what sub-watersheds to include were all sub-watersheds of the Bay Delta that are hydrologically connected and within 100 kilometers of the Bay Delta itself. So all developed watersheds in that range are included in the model at this time.
Okay, very good. And I know you mentioned using the statewide a database. Was there any need to, and again, your work's continuing to reach down, because I know that the agricultural commissioners and environmental management departments in respective county jurisdictions, certainly their reports are fed into state databases and so forth. But, you know, I heard in your commentary, you know, again, your soil analysis and trying to look at some of the crops and sort of the applications of some of those pesticides. If you didn't see them as a resource, I would just suggest that you might find that your local agricultural commissioners, their offices, and certainly the environmental management departments for those respective areas might be a good source of information that may not all be in the state database. And so maybe you're aware of that, maybe not, but I just wanted to offer that as a comment. So.
Thanks.
Okay. And again, thank you, Nicole. And then I just was curious with Elsie Carrillo's on the study of the snake habitat and so forth, that she mentioned she would get out in the field. So how is it that you know where to find the subject of your studies in the watershed of the snakes?
Yeah, so there's been literature on the documentation of certain species. Many of the 14 species of snakes that inhabit the Delta are semi-aquatic. So they live a lifestyle where they're both on terrestrial habitats as well as aquatic habitats. And so our work is going to largely focus on interactions between those documented species, as well as any others we do happen to come across, and potentially what they're feeding on. So they may be potentially feeding on any of the invasive species like red swamp crayfish, American bullfrogs, nutria rodents. Those are all species of interest that will potentially be finding out whether these snakes are consuming from manual palpation of regurgitating the meals that these snakes are consuming, just to determine that predator-prey relationship from the work that's on the literature.
And I know that a lot of times you're looking at literature and so forth, but when you're doing the field work, and again, I'm just asking a couple of candidates here, but there are any number of public lands available, but do you work with private landowners, i.e. Farmers and other residents, in trying to get access for purposes of, you know, getting more information gathered? And if so, how is that going with folks?
That's a great point. So we do have a community mentor that will be helping us facilitate those connections. We have applied in the past for Department of Fish and Wildlife permit to access sites that may not be accessible, especially when working with the giant garter snake that's federally endangered. We will have to have those permits go through. We have it and it's ready. We just need to actually purchase it. And so yeah, we can establish more connections through the community mentor that we have, and reaching out potentially to the services that license fishing licenses.
Okay.
You know, we have protected areas and that we can fish, in other areas that you cannot fish, and then we potentially serve as great sites to look into as well.
And I guess I just would offer a comment of, as researchers, and again, I find this all very fascinating, but I would just say that if there was assistance needed at the local level, I would, again, just as I advised a moment ago, Nicole, that there are local connections beyond the state agencies. And I know you've mentioned Mr. Hobbs and the State Department, and certainly universities have access to certain sites. But I think there's a general support and acceptance of science, the importance for the watersheds, certainly the Delta itself. And it may be that as a part of your research, if you needed to try to establish that access, that I would suggest that the staff at the Delta Protection Commission, staff at the Delta Conservancy, and certainly your local ag commissioners, and even your local farm bureaus have contact with landowners that, for lands that may be adjacent, but you wouldn't necessarily get access to from public waterways and or other public land, state or federal or local conservancies. And so, again, I don't know the extent and certain amount of time spent in the field, but offer that, because it might, again, broaden the ability to have more extensive research and background, and you might find that some of that interaction would be certainly useful in your research. And I think you would find more of it might not even just be anecdotal, but certainly experiential as far as people's work in the Delta and being longtime residents, farmers, environmental stewards, and so forth. So I just offer that as a suggestion. Again, you'll have mentors and you have limited time, obviously, in budgets, but I think it's a good way to build bridges and build an understanding about science and the efforts certainly of the Stewardship Council, the fellowship program, the Delta Science program, and would encourage if you need contacts, certainly I'd be happy to facilitate some of that, certainly in Sacramento County, but I know my colleagues in the other 4 Delta counties would certainly be, I think, would welcome that opportunity as well. So, but congratulations to all of you, and fascinating work. And as others have said, I think it just broadens the understanding and certainly work going forward on things that affect Delta, hopefully in a positive way. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Natoli. Any other questions? Well, I just want to say again, congratulations to all of the science fellows selected for the 2022 cohort year. It's incredible to see the passion, as Councilmember Smith alluded. It's amazing to see how many incredible young, talented minds and passion that they have for the work. And to Councilmember Natoli, I was actually wondering, some of this work is obviously a lot of work that is being done, right? And so how does it integrate with work that is currently being done? And I think it was Garfield? Yeah, who was talking that he's already working with UC Davis and their research lab. So it's just phenomenal. I think that this is just a win-win for not only for them and for their education and furthering and advancing their studies, but obviously it's a win-win for us as well. So again, congratulations to all of the amazing 2022 science fellows. We welcome all of your science, we welcome all of your research, and we welcome your talent that you bring to the table. And to Dr. Larson and to Jill Harris, thank you for your leadership on this. If there is no other questions from this council, Beck, is there any public comment?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Okay. We will now move on to item number 10, which is now item number 11, and that is the lead scientist report. And for that, we do have Dr. Laurel Larson, who is joining us virtually, and understand that Dr. Larson is under the weather. So first and foremost, we hope that you feel better very soon. And thank you for taking the time to present.
Well, thank you, Chair Medueno, and I just want to echo the congratulations to all of the Delta Science Fellows. Your work is truly inspired, and we're happy you could join us today. So, as I just said in my introduction to the Delta Science Fellows, one of my favorite things to say is that this fellowship is really an investment in the next generation of science leaders. And that is certainly true of the current Delta Science Fellow, whose recent paper I'm going to spotlight today. Denise Colombano is a 2-time Delta Science Fellow, first as a PhD student at UC Davis and currently as a postdoctoral scholar at UC Berkeley. She is also an avid and effective science communicator. You might have seen her on a previous Instagram Live session with me. And she's one of the leaders in science synthesis for the Delta. And we could leave up her the slide. The paper that she just published in the prestigious journal Global Change Biology describes a synthesis study that leverages 4 decades of monitoring data from multiple fish surveys. The study looks at how different fish species have changed in abundance over time once you control for their variability over space. And it looks at how precisely interacting factors control the abundance and stability of fish communities. This work is really important because it helps us to understand how levers that we can control, like inflows to the Delta, as well as those we can't, but that are important to anticipate, such as changing sea surface temperature, might impact fish abundance. It's also responsive to Management Need 5 of the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda, which calls for analysis and synthesis of the impact of interacting stressors on species recovery and ecosystem health, as well as being responsive to Action 6A, which calls for evaluating how climate change will impact long-term species persistence. So in this study, Dr. Colombano asks two important questions. The first question is, how does juvenile fish abundance vary over space, time, and in response to freshwater flows and sea surface temperatures? So in answering this question using statistical models, the research team looked at how trends in abundance varied among categories of species with different life strategies, including anadromous species, which hatch in tributaries of the delta and migrate to the ocean to complete their intermediate portion of their life cycle. There were also, as a second category, marine opportunists, which can migrate to the ocean to take advantage of favorable conditions, but otherwise live in the estuary. And then third, there are estuarine-dependent species, which, true to their title, implies species that are dependent on the Bay Delta estuary. The team found that anadromous species tend to be found in the upper estuary, and they decrease in abundance with lower freshwater flow. And they've also found that anadromous longfin smelt and striped bass have been decreasing over time. In contrast, the marine opportunists, which are more abundant in the lower estuary, have been increasing in abundance over time. Their populations tend to go up with lower freshwater flow, so opposite to the anadromous species, and they also tend to go up with higher sea surface temperatures. So meanwhile, estuarine-dependent species were found throughout the estuary, as you might expect, and they exhibited various responses to flow and sea surface temperature that were really species specific. So the second question in this study that Dr. Colombano and the research team asked is whether diversity, in terms of diversity of species, diversity of life history strategies, or diversity in terms of how those species are distributed through space. So does diversity lead to stability of the fish community overall? In other words, do any or all of these types of diversity buffer fish communities from fluctuations that they might experience in any one location or within any one species? So based on the statistical modeling, the team concluded that the answer to these questions was yes. So what are the management implications? Well, in periods of drought, such as the one that we're in currently, these findings provide some insight into how fish communities might respond to the way that we manage the delta. They suggest that flow pulses during drought may help sustain anadromous species, but on the other hand, the expansion of warmer, saltier water into the system may benefit marine opportunist species, such as anchovies. Historically, prior to water project operations, when the delta experienced even more variable flow conditions, it's likely that trade-off type fluctuations among these different categories of species led to higher stability of the fish community overall. So that concludes my summary of this article, and I am going to see, before I move on, if there are any questions from the council members.
Any questions, comments? No, I think we can move forward.
Okay, and I want to give a shout out and thanks to our state policy fellow, Elishaba, who prepared the visual abstract that you saw. So now I'm going to present on program activities. And one of the things I just wanted to give you an update on is implementation of the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda. And I just wanted to say that since we released the Science Action Agenda in late April and it was approved by the council, the science program has been working to distribute the document widely. There are now hard copies available. I don't know if they're present in the room that you're all in right now, but it would be great to get those into your hands. But I just wanted to give you an update on some of the presentations that have been made about the Science Action Agenda. There have been presentations to the Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management Program, the California Water Quality Monitoring Council, the State Water Resources Control Board, and the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee. And in addition, the science program staff and myself have been discussing this document widely within our network in order to develop a strategy to implement the Science Action Agenda's priority science actions in a collaborative manner that really mirrors the collaborative spirit that went into the development of this document. So there are conversations underway between the science program and some of our funding partners, both past funding partners and current funding partners, about how we might be more collaborative, at least at the outset of calls for competitive funding. So there is discussion right now on forming a work group and instituting a pre-proposal process through which investigators would submit their ideas for proposals to a multi-agency group of potential funders. And there could then be an opportunity to provide those investigators with feedback and direct them to the most appropriate funding programs among the different agencies. And this is something that could potentially solve fiscal year incompatibilities between the agencies. But it is a discussion that's very much underway. And just as a reminder, funding competitive research, as well as directed research, is a primary mechanism that we have for implementation of the Science Action Agenda. The second thing I wanted to give you an update on is the water temperature modeling platform peer review. And I'm happy to report that last week on July 19th and 20th, the Delta Science Program convened an independent review panel to evaluate the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation's water temperature monitoring platform for the Shasta, Keswick, Sacramento River system. This is the first hybrid panel that we've ever run. There were some panelists who were in person and some who were remote. So we are forging new ground with these independent review panels. This is the first of two reviews that will be conducted through this contract with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. The second, which is tentatively scheduled for fall of 2023, will assess the water temperature modeling platform for the American River and Stanislaus River systems in the overall Central Valley project. And I just wanted to say that this review has important management implications. As you've heard me say, many of the listed fish species in our estuary are at the southern extent of their range, meaning that they are quite sensitive to water temperatures. And as we look to the future, water temperature is going to be one of the limiting factors that controls the abundance or even the persistence of some of these fish species in our estuaries. It's something that we also have limited control over through the way in which we operate delta reservoirs and the cold water pools deep within those reservoirs. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has really been forging new ground in developing a comprehensive water temperature modeling platform. I've heard others say that this could be an example that other estuaries or aquatic systems in different parts of the country might look to as they begin to face similar challenges associated with warmer temperatures and climate change. And so now is a really opportune time to give the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation feedback on the technical aspects associated with this modeling platform in order to improve the modeling tools. And I'll say that these modeling tools are being used right now to predict temperatures over short timeframes for real-time dam operations, as well as over longer timeframes, such as seasonally for developing temperature management plans and even longer timeframes for planning studies. This review panel is an advice panel, and I'll just make the distinction that we do conduct advice panels and review panels, where advice panels are designed to give feedback on projects that are at earlier stages of development. And then just as a reminder of some of the procedures that we undertake in the in convening these independent peer review panels. The reviewers that are selected are completely independent. They're associated with external universities or agencies. The lead scientist has the final say over who goes on the review panels. That review panel is provided with a set of charge questions that is finalized by the Delta lead scientist, so by myself. And then in terms of how this review panel went, I'll say that the panelists were impressed with the water temperature monitoring platform overall and the productivity of the relatively small team at the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation that has been devoted to the project. They also had plenty of preliminary feedback, which the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation found was quite constructive. And that feedback focused on areas of the documentation that needed clarification for purposes of transparency, as well as suggestions on how technical considerations like data gap filling and estimation of inflows might be improved, as well as how methods for testing the performance of the model might be improved, and assessing how errors accumulate across different across different modeling components. The panel also had many questions for the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, requesting clarification that could help them better address their charge questions. So the immediate next step for this panel is that the panel is going to be working independently over a period of time to produce a review report that will eventually be made publicly available. So I think that's all I had to say about that. And then the final part of this report today is the by the numbers report. And so, as you all know, we haven't received precipitation since the last council meeting. So we're still sitting at fairly low percentages for overall precipitation received in the Northern Sierra and Central Sierra, which are at 79% of precipitation that is typically received by this time of year in the Northern Sierra and 62% in the Central Sierra. As far as reservoir levels go, Shasta is at 53% of what is typical for this time of year. Oroville is at 62%, and the San Luis Reservoir is at 73%. The Sacramento River right now is currently flowing at 71% of what's typical this time of year, and in part that may be due to increased flows on the American River because the Bureau of Reclamation is making water transfers right now from Folsom. The San Joaquin River is at just 12% of its 20-year flow average. So that is running quite low at this time. Water project exports right now are at 34% of what is typical for this time of year. So that concludes my report, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Questions or comments of Dr. Larson? I had a couple just clarifying questions, Laura, with regard to the water temperature modeling. Did I understand correctly? It's the southern part of the Delta that's where we're seeing more of the trend in terms of the water temperature rising. Did I understand that correctly?
So I didn't really talk about that today, and I have a bit of a brain fog with this illness. But
Yeah, no, only because I was when we were talking, and maybe it was with the fellows as well, where we were talking about the fish species in the southern region and its ability to exist in abundance or persevere. And for some reason I thought you had mentioned, or maybe it was one of the fellows, again, the decline of specific fish species being able to adapt to the water temperature, and the water temperature is rising, but was it just in one particular part of the Delta, or are we talking about the entire Delta?
There are, so Dr. Sam Bashevkin in the Delta Science program does have a recent paper in which he analyzed trends in water temperature across the Delta. And there are regional differences in those trends. You know, on whole, for the Delta as a whole, there's a warming trend, but that trend is more pronounced in certain parts of the Delta than others. And I can, you know, what I'm having a brain fog about right now is which part of the Delta was experiencing the highest trends, but I could definitely get back to you on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you don't have to get back to me now. You can, we can talk about that later. And then also with regard to other estuaries across the country, you know, obviously California is unique in terms of where we are in our precipitation, but are there other estuaries that, you know, we could also learn from in terms of, you know, their practices in terms of water temperature modeling?
So my understanding is that we are really setting a precedent here, because, you know, this estuary is one of the main places where we have listed species that are really at that limit already, at that thermal limit already. And so California is setting precedents on how we incorporate temperature regulation into the biological opinions for management of those species. And so, you know, my understanding is that this water temperature modeling platform is pretty unique to this system, but has a lot of potential to be applied elsewhere as these water temperature concerns become growing concerns in the other estuaries.
Got it. Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. And thank you for the questions.
Absolutely. If there are no other questions or comments from this council, Beck, are there any public comments?
No, Madam Chair, there's no public comment.
We will now move on to item number 12, and that is the San Joaquin Council of Governments 2022 Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy Comment Letter. And for that, we have Jessica Pearson, who is going to be introducing the topic.
Okay, great, thank you. As some of you may recall from similar action items in the past, the Delta Reform Act specifically requires the council to review and advise regional planning agencies regarding the consistency of their regional planning documents with the Delta Plan. And it also requires these agencies to consult with the council early in their planning process. So in the past few years, the council has done just that for the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Association of Bay Area Governments Plan Bay Area 2050, and also the Sacramento Area Council of Governments 2019 plan. So today we are asking the council to consider approval of a comment letter offering this advice to the third of the 3 regional planning agencies that overlap with the Delta, the San Joaquin Council of Governments, for its 2022 Regional Transportation Plan / Sustainable Community Strategy. I will now pass the mic over to Deputy Executive Officer for Planning and Performance, Jeff Henderson, to provide an overview of our role and of the draft letter, and he will also introduce our guests from the San Joaquin COG. Jeff?
Good morning, council members. It's a pleasure to be here to talk with you about the San Joaquin Council of Governments Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy. Next slide, please. The council, as Jessica mentioned, the council is required to review and provide timely advice to local and regional planning agencies regarding the consistency of various types of land use and conservation plans with the Delta Plan, including sustainable community strategies that were established by Senate Bill 375. The council's input on these local and regional planning documents includes a number of factors, and statute indicates that it includes but is not limited to the consistency of the Regional Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy with the ecosystem restoration needs of the Delta, as outlined in the Delta Plan, and whether the lands set aside for natural resource protection in the Regional Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy are sufficient to meet the Delta's ecosystem needs. And these requirements are set forth in Water Code Section 85212, which is a part of the Delta Reform Act. And just by way of reference, sustainable community strategies are long-range regional land use planning documents that are used to guide regional transportation planning and funding, as well as greenhouse gas reduction approaches. And they're typically prepared by metropolitan planning organizations or regional councils of government. Next slide, please. So the Delta Reform Act requires a metropolitan planning organization that is preparing a regional transportation plan that includes any land within the primary zone or the secondary zone of the Delta to consult with the council early in its planning process regarding the issues and the policy choices that relate to the council's advice. And as Jessica mentioned, there are 3 MPOs with jurisdiction in the legal Delta and Sassoon Marsh. SACOG last updated its RTP-SCS in 2019, and council staff submitted a comment letter in support of that plan update and its consistency with the Delta plan, which the council approved in October of 2019. MTC and ABAG updated their RTP-SCS in 2021. Council staff submitted a comment letter in support of that plan update and its consistency with the Delta plan, which the council considered and approved in September of 2021. And SJCOG's RTP-SCS is the subject of today's presentation and will intend to move forward to their board at the end of August of 2022. Next slide, please. So our statutory requirements indicate that the MPO must provide a draft SCS no later than 60 days prior to its intention to adopt that final RTP. And if the council concludes that the submitted draft is inconsistent with the Delta plan, it must provide written notice of the claimed inconsistency prior to the Metropolitan Planning Organization considering adoption of the final RTP-SCS. And if the MPO then receives timely written notice of inconsistency, the adoption of that RTP-SCS must include a detailed response to the council's notice. SJCOG released its draft 2022 RTP-SCS plan on June 7th of this year. The draft EIR was released for public review on June 24th. And preliminary findings as to the consistency of that draft with the RTP-SCS are offered within a comment letter that's before the council today. Next slide, please. So we may be asking, why is this important with regard to our statutory authority? And it's important not only because consultation on regional plans is required by the Delta Reform Act, but also because the Water Code exempts actions within the secondary zone of the Delta that a metropolitan planning organization determines is consistent with a sustainable community strategy that the Air Resources Board in turn has determined would achieve regional greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. Those types of actions, so if a future proposed land use or transportation action is consistent with an SCS, that action is not by definition a covered action under the Delta plan. So that's a very important consideration for us as we go forward, because essentially future projects that are consistent with the RTP-SCS would be exempt from our process. Therefore, it's important for us to ensure that the SCS itself is consistent with the Delta plan. And the map on the slide that's on the screen before you illustrates the land within the secondary zone and the jurisdiction of each of the 3 MPOs. And SJCOG's 2022 RTP-SCS includes the land within the secondary zone that's shown in the southeast portion of that mapped area in yellow within San Joaquin County. So we're now going to invite Tim Cahoya and Kim Anderson from San Joaquin COG to make a presentation to the council regarding the RTP-SCS itself. And following that, Program Manager Eva Bush will guide us through the analysis that the staff has taken with regard to the SCS and its consistency with the Delta plan, and then our recommendations to the council today.
May I ask you a question before Jeff? I think what you explained is an important fact. The SCS that is not in covered action yet has to be complying or in consistency with the Delta plan. Is there then in the future or any time the idea of bringing it in the covered action? I mean, is that, I'm trying to understand, are they always going to be parallel, or not that one is better than the other, but I'm just intrigued for this.
Yeah, this is actually a rather interesting construct, if you will, of the Delta Reform Act, in the sense that it it brought together the state's Delta policy with what was occurring, actually had very recently occurred with SB 375 in terms of the state's greenhouse gas reduction policy and land use policy and land use and transportation policy. And it's a way of saying, as you've indicated, these plans exist in parallel. And the construct is for us to review those regional plans to ensure that if those regional plans are implemented, they'd be done so in a fashion that's consistent with the Delta plan and affords projects that are consistent or designed to be consistent with that regional transportation plan or SCS, the benefit of some security, if you will, with regard to consistency with the Delta plan. So it's actually a rather elegant construction in the act, and something that we take very seriously because of the need to look at these SCSs now for projects that might not occur for 5 years or 6 years or longer. And it's also a neat way of tying federal transportation dollars to Delta policy too, indirectly.
Thank you. And I remember you presented this before on another matter. Again, the same review. In the process when they develop these plans, are they consulting, reaching out, or we get these after there is certain kind of a draft already released?
Eva will go over that as part of our presentation. She'll talk about the interactions that we've had with SJCOG, and then I would ask if Kim and Tim can cover their interactions with us as well as the broader community as part of their presentation.
Thank you.
I would just add that it's not a coincidence that the co-author of the Delta Reform Act was also the author of SB 375. And so then Senator Darrell Steinberg had an incentive to think carefully about how to link these two planning processes.
Interesting.
And with that, I'd invite Tim and Kim to join us and make your presentation to the council. My understanding is they're participating remotely.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Kim Anderson. I'm the Deputy Director of Planning for the San Joaquin Council of Governments. I'm newly back since last August, but I did work with the council back for the both 2018 and 2014 RTP SCS. We have had a great working relationship, and in fact, have try to have quarterly meetings. They don't always occur that frequently, but with that, I'll introduce Tim Kohaya, who's been the project manager for our 2022 Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy, and he'll be walking you through some of the technical aspects of the plan as well as some of the policies that pertain specifically to the goals established for the Delta. And Tim, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kim. Next slide, please. So what we'll be covering during this presentation is that we'll give you some information about our agency, which is the San Joaquin Council of Governments, and also, of course, about our project, which is the RTP SCS, which stands for Regional Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy. Go over consistency with the Delta Plan, cover some of the proposed strategies, some of the proposed projects that are either within or near the Delta Plan area, and then we'll have some time for questions and comments. Next slide, please. So I'll give you some information about our agency. So we are first and foremost a regional government for the San Joaquin County region. That includes, of course, San Joaquin County and the 7 incorporated cities. And then we have a lot of responsibilities. This list that you see here on the slide is by no means an exhaustive list. You might not be aware that we do implement or administer a van pool program and also a freeway service patrol where we stranded motorists on the freeways could be could attain a towing service. And of course, we're required to prepare the regional transportation plan and with it the sustainable community strategy. Next slide, please. So the RTP SCS is the long-range transportation planning document for the San Joaquin County region. It has a planning period of about 25 years, and it has to be updated every 4 years. And this particular document does matter because, first of all, it lists the priority transportation projects for the region. In fact, a transportation project cannot receive federal or state funds without being on this list. I have to emphasize, though, that these are projects that have identified funding sources. They do not necessarily have funding to start construction. And then the RTP SCS matters because it does ensure that our region will continue to get the funding we need to keep for our transportation projects. In fact, without an adopted RTP SCS, our region does not qualify to receive federal funds for transportation projects. And also the RTP SCS provides a regional lens for community-led planned growth and development. Next slide, please. So before SB 375, we were just required to prepare a regional transportation plan, or RTP. But now, because of SB 375, we are required to develop a sustainable community strategy, or SCS. And this particular portion of our RTP SCS ties transportation investment with land use patterns because there's such a close relationship between transportation and land use. And through the SCS, we have to show that the policies, actions, and projects that are listed in our RTP SCS can help our project or plan meet the greenhouse gas reduction targets that are set by the California Air Resources Board. Also, the SCS could provide data and assistance to our member agencies in meeting their state housing goals for all income levels. We did have an extensive public outreach effort. We had a couple of MetroQuest surveys and also a number of workshops. And the number one comment that we received in regards to where people want to put new growth is that they want to place more new growth in existing commercial corridors and centers and around transit stations rather than in greenfield areas. So we have responded by making adjustments to our plan to respond to this particular comment. Now, our plan does make some improvements over the 2018 plan that was adopted, 3-4 years ago. That was the last plan that we approved. And so our plan does, if implemented, will result in over 5,000 less acres of land developed, also result in almost 4,000 less acres of prime farmland developed. The residential net density will increase from 8 units per acre to 9.9 units per acre. And the new housing units that will occur between the years 2022 2046, if our plan is implemented, the percentage of that new growth would be about 42% multifamily. And our plan does result in less water consumption per household and also less energy used from new growth in comparison to the 2018 plan. Now I'll show that our plan is consistent with the Delta plan. So this map shows the new growth areas that's going to result from the implementation of our plan. We are required by SB 375 to show where the new growth is going to occur and what type of new growth is going to occur if our plan is implemented. So the areas in yellow are the residential new growth areas. The areas in orange and red are the commercial new growth areas. And finally, the areas in blue are the industrial new growth areas. As you can see on this map, none of the areas do overlap the Delta plan area that's in green. In fact, we did, when we did have our initial land use plan, we did have to make a couple adjustments to make sure that none of the new growth areas are within the Delta plan. And then we did work with the Delta Stewardship Council staff regarding this. Now I'm going to go over some of the proposed strategies that you might be interested in. So one strategy that we're proposing, which we are carrying forward from our 2018 plan, is to encourage efficient development patterns. And that includes the logical expansion of the urban area. And a good example of that is occurring in our region is the city of Lodi that has practiced logical urban expansion through the years. And as you can see on this aerial photograph, that there's a clear delimitation line between the urbanized areas, which is basically the southern portion of Lodi, with the adjacent agricultural areas. And so having efficient development patterns would also help maintain the agricultural viability of the nearby agricultural areas and also help maintain the nearby natural resources. And then a new strategy is the preservation of natural resources. But we have been in the habitat preservation business for over 20 years. And in fact, we have a section in our agency, it's called SJCOG Inc., which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that implements the San Joaquin County multi-species habitat conservation and open space plan. And through the years, they have reserved over 20,000 acres within San Joaquin County. So it's been a very successful program. And then finally, another new strategy is support efforts for transportation network resiliency, reliability, and climate adaptation. We recently completed 2 documents. One was a study and the other was an implementation plan. The climate adaptation and resiliency study identifies risks and vulnerabilities to our transportation network from the impacts of climate change. It also identifies any resiliency planning efforts by our member agencies, and finally identifies any planning gaps in that resiliency study, or in resiliency planning, I'm sorry. And then there's the regional resiliency implementation plan that has specific solutions for some of the problems that arise because of the impacts of climate change upon the transportation network, such as asset degradation, particularly the degradation of roadway surfaces, the need for efficient emergency evacuation, and also the greater occurrence of traffic delays because of climate change events. So now I'm going to go over some of the proposed projects, and these are located either within or near the Delta Plan area. So this map shows the mainline highway projects, and these projects are listed in our RTP SES. And these projects are in red. And the only mainline project that is going to be within the Delta Plan area is going to be the I-205 Managed Lane project. Next slide, please. So this particular project originally started as looking at putting in HOV lanes or carpool lanes on I-205. But now, because of the success of the express lanes on I-580 in Alameda County and the growing congestion on I-205, we are now looking at HOT lanes or hot lanes, which stands for high occupancy toll lanes, as another option for I-205. Then we are also looking at how we could use the median strip between the 2 roadways of I-205 to make the system more efficient. So we're looking at reversible lanes, autonomous vehicle lanes, bus-only lanes, passenger rail, Valley Link, and that includes Valley Link and ACE, and mobility hubs, park and ride lots, and transit stations. So we're looking at a number of options to ensure that the transportation system become more efficient and also to meet the challenges of technology. Then finally, there's regional roadways and interchange projects. There's a couple of regional roadway projects that are within the Delta Plan area. They are roadway expansion or widening projects, usually from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. There's also one project that's actually going to extend into the Delta Plan area. That's the Golden Valley Parkway project that is located between Tracy and Lathrop. And then there's a number of intersection projects that are also either near or within the Delta Plan area. They're all along I-205 within the Tracy vicinity. So this project has been going on for a long time, almost 3 years. And now we're anticipating to bring forward our draft RTP SCS to our board of directors in late August. And right now we're within a 55-day public review period that started on June 7th. It's going to end on August 1st. Next slide, please. And so if you want to provide comments on our plan, you can. Of course, you could access our plan at our website. And then if you want to provide comments, you could email us at rtp@sjcog.org, or you could email or send a regular mail to me using the mailing address that's on this slide. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Kim. And of course, thank you to Eva and to Jeff. But Eva, did you have a follow-up report to Tim's presentation?
Do we ask questions now or we hold them till after hers?
If you have questions,
Questions for
yeah,
him, yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Go ahead, Maria.
First of all, I wanted to congratulate you. I think the strategy development's wonderful. I appreciate this more than anything because I'm an urban planner by training and transportation planner. So I really like hearing what you did. It's not everywhere. So two questions I had. One is I wanted to ask you about the efficient development strategies that you talked about in Lodi. I just want to see if you could elaborate a little bit. And then I have one more after that.
Yeah, with the city of Lodi, we did notice that, through the years, they have been very careful in when they do expand, they use logical boundaries. And we always thought that that was a good example. And Kim, you might want to add anything to that?
No, I will say what Tim is referring to is, these are Lodi's policies that are consistent with the Regional Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy. Very often we'll look at these general plan documents as they come through and make comments. And we work directly with the jurisdictions when we're developing the SCS so that there's consistency and the onset between the two documents, the general plans and the Sustainable Community Strategy. We always would like to point out that as a regional agency, we don't have overt land use control, that does still reside with the jurisdictions. But these consistency findings are very important to ensure any of the projects coming through the jurisdictions that would like to take advantage of some of the streamlining opportunities under SB 375 do need to show that consistency. And so if we're doing that at the onset, it certainly can streamline that process later.
Very helpful. Thank you. I congratulate you. I think it's a great effort. My second question was when you talked about creating the HOV lanes and you talked about a number of different things that you do on that. Was there at some point, or was this a requirement to create a model that shows reduction of emission as a result of that? Or when you picked and choose at the end, was there a comprehensive way of looking at it, of what it did for the sustainability in the region?
I can take that question. Thank you. Well, certainly that project right now is at the environmental document stage. So I do want to be specific about that. So the current environmental document process is considering the alternatives. So what Tim is talking about here are part of the alternative projects that are being looked at as part of that environmental document. And further, there are additional requirements of that environmental document, all of Senate Bill 743 that does talk about potential impacts as far as both vehicle miles traveled or VMT and GHG reductions. So there needs to be some consistency between the SCS and the subsequent environmental documents. So yeah, that project is moving forward, but the environmental document won't be completed until I believe 2023. So it's ongoing.
So, but then the locally preferred alternatives are picked as a part of the EIR, or they're still?
Yeah, the EIR in the end will, there will be a locally preferred alternative.
Preferred alternative, yeah. So these are possible alternatives that can be picked from, but they're not finalized before we go with the locally preferred alternative.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Thank you. Very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great questions. Yes, Councilmember Natoli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One, I just wanted to give a shout out, say hi to Tim Kohio. Tim worked with the County of Sacramento Community Development Planning Department for a number of years, and certainly had many opportunities over the years to present to the Board of Supervisors of Sacramento County. But I wanted to ask maybe for Kim, and it was as I expected, but when you showed the slide again for Lodi and recognizing the land use authority is vested with the municipalities or with the county of San Joaquin, but it was pointed out that the urban line, protecting agriculture. I guess I'm curious, are there any strategies embedded in the regional planning documents that, yeah, to that slide right there? I think it's Harney Lane that's on the south or on the bottom portion there where you see the agricultural land and then residential development right up to the north side of that street. Are there any strategies though, so that the farmland doesn't become the buffer for residential development or commercial development? Because you're a little further to the east, as you're well aware, you've got a large community size shopping center with new residential development closer to Highway 99. I'm just curious, in San Joaquin County, do they employ some strategies with the unincorporated county, obviously under the guidance of the Board of Supervisors, 7 cities with their city councils? What's utilized to protect agriculture in a way that with the agricultural practices, and certainly as you move further to the west with the Delta and so forth, that, the separators that allow for logical urban suburban development, but also protects agriculture in a way that is meaningful. So you just don't have the farmer across the street have to be, curtail their operations that relates to, typical farming practices. So I'm curious whether at the regional level, planning agency, you help employ strategies that then those interfaces occur obviously with the cities, but also the towns throughout the county. So I'm curious, Kim.
Well, that was a big question. What I'll say, I don't know that I can answer in any specificity, at least as I'm sitting here right now, is the particular strategies within the county general plan as opposed to the city of Lodi general plan. What I can say is these areas are also covered by the habitat conservation plan as well. And so to the extent that these are mapped areas within the habitat conservation plan, there are specific strategies, collecting the development fees paid by developers and having that go into the habitat plan for acquisition of both agricultural as well as natural land resources. And of course, any of those holdings would be held in perpetuity. As far as the regional agency, our strategies, I think, are of a more general nature. I can't speak to, say, an urban, urban expansion boundary or that kind of thing. What I can say is that the policies in the regional plan are consistent with both the county and the city's stated policies in their general plan documents. And I apologize that I can't go into more detail than that as far as to the particulars of those strategies. But certainly something that we could put together if that would be of interest.
Okay. Again, I just looking at that map though, you see the interface is apparent there, but you've got just the width of the street itself is all that separates, the front yard of a house from a farming operation immediately across the street. And I just didn't know, what level of protections there might be for the farmer. And you did point out with the HCP, there may be, conserved lands that may provide some incentive either initially and over the long term for farming operations. But again, this is unique to San Joaquin County. So I was just curious, and certainly as we look at the Delta and you get areas that are subject to, floodplain elevations and, soil types and so forth. But I appreciate your response. One other question I just had very quickly. I know that with the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, your sister companion agency to the north, they did what was called a rural to urban strategy as related to farm to market, and I know that it has some express emphasis. It was called the RUX study, and I don't know that it was necessarily ultimately implemented, but talked about ways to better connect and largely in the Delta in Sacramento County portion of the Delta to farm to market, as I said, and for those things that would be of importance environmentally or visitors to the area. Has that been anything that's been taken up by the COG in San Joaquin County?
Yeah, not specifically, and we did work pretty closely with David Shabazian when that project was being developed, and it was quite robust in the analyses that they did. We have done some work over the years with both the city of Stockton and with the county with some of their initiatives they've had around agricultural viability as it related to economic development, and specifically about value added agriculture type activities to help ensure continued viability. But at this time, SJCOG beyond the Habitat Conservation Plan has not taken on anything quite as expansive as SACOG's Rural Urban Connection Strategy, as I think what the RUCS program was called.
Okay, good. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. Eva, your turn.
And I need the microphone. So good morning, Chair Madueña and council members. So I'm Eva Bush, and I will be finishing up the presentation. So SJCOG has engaged with the council regarding the RTP SCSC since 2021, and the council wrote an earlier comment letter on the notice of preparation on January of 2021. A draft comment letter on the draft plan and the draft DIR is before the council today. During our consultation, we discussed consistency with ecosystem restoration needs and the sufficiency of land set aside. In addition, we also discussed consistency with the Delta Plan policy, DPP1, regarding land use pattern, and the Delta Plan recommendation, DPR5, regarding transportation investments. Next slide, please. And one more. So it is through the analysis supporting our proposed findings, the RTP SCS would not accommodate urban growth in priority habitat restoration areas established in ERP3. The land use scenario would accommodate new development within existing communities and would not divide existing communities. New transportation projects and new planned development would occur along existing transportation corridors in urbanized areas. Planned development projects would meet the exemptions for planned development depicted in general plans that is set forth in DPP1. And planned transportation investments would improve the capacity and safety of roads and highways in the Delta and include multiple bicycle and pedestrian projects within the Delta. Next slide. It's the staff recommendation today that the council approve the preliminary findings provided in the draft July 28, 2022 comment letter to SJCOG regarding the draft 2022 RTP SCS. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva, and thank you, Jeff. Just a couple of comments to Kim and to Tim. Thank you for your presentation and your update. I actually worked on SB 375 and actually traveled from Stockton down into Bakersfield, meeting with county boards of supervisors, city councils on how to, again, invest more in transit-oriented development, more infill development, obviously the preservation of ag land and reducing emissions. And so I guess this is, I'm going back to my roots, and I see the correlations, if you will, between the SCS and the work that we do on behalf of the Delta. So again, I just want to thank staff as well for putting so much time and investment in this, because this is very, very important work. So I guess that was just my comment. Just thank you. This is all great stuff. If there's no other comments or questions from this council, I will ask Beck, is there any public comment before we take a motion?
No, Madam Chair, no public comment.
Okay. At this time, I will entertain a motion for the approval of the San Joaquin Council of Governments 2022 Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategies comment letter. And I see a motion from Councilmember Damrell. You're a second.
Second.
And a second from Councilmember Moranian. And we will now take a vote. We'll start with Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Maronian,
Maronian, aye.
Councilmember Natoli,
Totally aye.
Councilmember Damrell, and Councilmember Madueño, aye. And this vote is a unanimous approval. So again, thank you to staff for all your work.
Thank you very
And
much.
thank you to Kim and to Tim. And I remember you, Kim, from back in the day. So
Yes, it's good to see you again.
good to see you as well. We will now move on to item number 13, the preparation for our next council meeting. And our next council meeting is scheduled for August 25th, 26. The location is currently pending, and we will of course notice this 10 days prior to. And so we are exploring again some possibilities for also a change of location. I'd actually personally like to see us do more meetings out in the Delta if at all possible. So we will keep you updated on that. And if there is no other business, doesn't look like it, we will now officially adjourn the meeting at 11:48. I'm going to give you guys an extra few minutes. How about that? Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day and be safe. Thank you. I'm going to go get rid of my stench right now.